Ann Veronica by H. G. Wells. Chapter the 11th. Thoughts in Prison. Part 1. The first night in prison she found it impossible to sleep. The bed was hard beyond any experience of hers, the bedclothes coarse and insufficient, the cell at once cold and stuffy. The little grating in the door, the sense of constant inspection, worried her. She kept opening her eyes and looking at it. She was fatigued physically and mentally, and neither mind nor body could rest. She became aware that at regular intervals a light flashed upon her face, and a bodiless eye regarded her, and this, as the night wore on, became a torment. Capes came back into her mind. He haunted a state between hectic dreaming and mild delirium, and she found herself talking aloud to him. All through the night an entirely impossible and monumental Capes confronted her, and she argued with him about men and women. She visualized him as in a policeman's uniform and quite impassive. On some insane score she fancied she had to state her case in verse. "We are the music and you are the instrument," she said. "We are verse and you are prose. For men have reason, women rhyme. A man scores always, all the time." This couplet sprang into her mind from nowhere, and immediately begot an endless series of similar couplets that she began to compose and address to Capes. They came teeming distressfully through her aching brain. A man can kick, his skirts don't tear. A man scores always, everywhere. His dress for no man lays a snare. A man scores always, everywhere. For hats that fail and hats that flare, toppers their universal wear. A man scores always, everywhere. Men's waists are neither here nor there. A man scores always, everywhere. A man can manage without hair. A man scores always, everywhere. There are no males at men to stare. A man scores always, everywhere. And children must we women bear. "Oh, damn!" she cried, as the 101st couplet or so presented itself in her unwilling brain. For a time she worried about that compulsory bath and cutaneous diseases. Then she fell into a fever of remorse for the habit of bad language she had acquired. "A man can smoke, a man can swear. A man scores always, everywhere." She rolled over on her face and stuffed her fingers in her ears to shut out the rhythm from her mind. She lay still for a long time, her mind resumed at a more tolerable pace. She found herself talking to Capes in an undertone of rational admission. "There is something to be said for the ladylike theory after all," she admitted. "Women ought to be gentle and submissive persons, strong only in virtue and in resistance to evil compulsion. My dear, I can call you that here anyhow. I know that. The Victorians overdid it a little, I admit. Their idea of maidenly innocence was just a blank white, the sort of flat white that doesn't shine. But that doesn't alter the fact that there is innocence. And I've read and thought and guessed and looked, until my innocence, it's smirched. Smirched! You see, dear, one is passionately anxious for something. What is it? One wants to be clean. You want me to be clean. You would want me to be clean if you gave me a thought, that is. I wonder if you give me a thought. I'm not a good woman. I don't mean I'm not a good woman. I mean that I'm not a good woman. My poor brain is so mixed, dear. I hardly know what I'm saying. I mean I'm not a good specimen of a woman. I've got a streak of male. Things happen to women, proper women, and all they have to do is to take them well. They've just got to keep white. But I'm always trying to make things happen, and I get myself dirty. It's all dirt that washes off, dear, but it's dirt. The white, unaggressive woman who corrects and nurses and serves and is worshipped and betrayed, the martyr queen of men, the white mother. You can't do that sort of thing unless you do it over religion, and there's no religion in me, of that sort, worth a rap. I'm not gentle, certainly not a gentlewoman. I'm not coarse, no, but I've got no purity of mind, no real purity of mind. A good woman's mind has angels with flaming swords at the portals to keep out fallen thoughts. I wonder if there are any good women really. I wish I didn't swear. I do swear. It began as a joke. It developed into a sort of secret and private bad manners. It's got to be at last like tobacco ash over all my sayings and doings. "Go it, missy," they said. "Kick out." I swore at that policeman and disgusted him. Disgusted him! For men policemen never blush. A man in all things scores so much. Damn! Things are getting plainer. It must be the dawn creeping in. Now here hath been dawning another blue day. I'm just a poor woman, please take it away. Oh, sleep! 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 Part 2. "Now," said Ann Veronica, after the half-hour of exercise, and sitting on the uncomfortable wooden seat without a back that was her perch by day, "it's no good staying here in a sort of maze. I've got nothing to do for a month but think. I may as well think. I ought to be able to think things out. How shall I put the question? What am I? What have I got to do with myself? I wonder if many people have thought things out. Are we all just seizing hold of phrases and obeying moods? It wasn't so with old-fashioned people. They knew right from wrong. They had a clear-cut religious faith that seemed to explain everything and give a rule for everything. We haven't. I haven't, anyhow, and it's no good pretending there is one when there isn't. I suppose I believe in God. Never really thought about him. People don't. I suppose my creed is, I believe rather indistinctly in God the Father Almighty, the substratum of the evolutionary process, and, in a vein of vague sentimentality that doesn't give a datum for anything at all, in Jesus Christ his Son. It's no sort of good, Ann Veronica, pretending one does believe when one doesn't. And as for praying for faith, this sort of monologue is about as near as any one of my sort ever gets to prayer. Aren't I asking? Asking plainly now. We've all been mixing our ideas, and we've got that intellectual hot coppers, every blessed one of us. A confusion of motives, that's what I am. There is this absurd craving for Mr. Capes. The Capes crave, they would call it in America. Why do I want him so badly? Why do I want him and think about him and fail to get away from him? It isn't all of me. The first person you love, Ann Veronica, is yourself. Get hold of that. The soul you have to save is Ann Veronica's soul. She knelt upon the floor of her cell and clasped her hands and remained for a long time in silence. "Oh, God," she said at last, "how I wish I had been taught to pray." Part 3. She had some idea of putting these subtle and difficult issues to the chaplain when she was warned of his advent, but she had not reckoned with the etiquette of Canongate. She got up as she had been told to do at his appearance, and he amazed her by sitting down, according to custom, on her stool. He still wore his hat, to show that the days of miracles and Christ being civil to sinners are over for ever. She perceived that his countenance was only composed by a great effort, his features severely compressed. He was ruffled, and his ears were red, no doubt from some adjacent controversy. He classified her as he seated himself. "Another young woman, I suppose," he said, "who knows better than her Maker about her place in the world. Have you anything to ask me?" Ann Veronica readjusted her mind hastily. Her back stiffened. She produced from the depths of her pride the ugly investigatory note of the modern district visitor. "Are you a special sort of clergyman?" she said after a pause, and looking down her nose at him. "Or do you go to the universities?" "Oh!" he said, profoundly. He panted for a moment with unuttered replies, and then, with a scornful gesture, got up and left the cell. So that Ann Veronica was not able to get the expert advice she certainly needed upon her spiritual state. Part 4. After a day or so she thought more steadily. She found herself in a phase of violent reaction against the suffrage movement, a phase greatly promoted by one of those unreasonable objections people of Ann Veronica's temperament take at times, to the girl in the next cell to her own. She was a large, resilient girl with a foolish smile, a still more foolish expression of earnestness, and a throaty contralto voice. She was noisy and hilarious and enthusiastic, and her hair was always abominably done. In the chapel she sang with an open-lunged gusto that silenced Ann Veronica altogether, and in the exercising yard slouched round with carelessly dispersed feet. Ann Veronica decided that hoydenish ragger was the only phrase to express her. She was always breaking rules, whispering asides, intimating signals. She became at times an embodiment for Ann Veronica of all that made the suffrage movement defective and unsatisfying. She was always initiating petty breaches of discipline. Her greatest exploit was the howling before the midday meal. This was an imitation of the noises made by the carnivora at the Zoological Gardens at feeding time. Their idea was taken up by prisoner after prisoner, until the whole place was alive with barkings, yappings, roarings, pelican chatterings, and feline yowlings, interspersed with shrieks of hysterical laughter. To many in that crowded solitude it came as an extraordinary relief. It was better even than the hymn-singing. But it annoyed Ann Veronica. "Idiots!" she said when she heard this pandemonium, and with particular reference to this young lady with the throaty contralto next door. "Intolerable idiots!" It took some days for this phase to pass, and it left some scars and something like a decision. "Violence won't do it," said Ann Veronica. "Begin violence and the woman goes under. But all the rest of our case is right. Yes." As the long solitary days wore on, Ann Veronica found a number of definite attitudes and conclusions in her mind. One of these was the classification of women into women who are and women who are not hostile to men. "The real reason why I am out of place here," she said, "is because I like men. I can talk with them. I've never found them hostile. I've got no feminine class feeling. I don't want any laws or freedoms to protect me from a man like Mr. Capes. I know that in my heart I would take whatever he gave. A woman wants a proper alliance with a man who is better stuff than herself. She wants that and needs it more than anything else in the world. It may not be just, it may not be fair, but things are so. It isn't law nor custom nor masculine violence settled that. It is just how things happen to be. She wants to be free. She wants to be legally and economically free, so as not to be subject to the wrong man. But only God, who made the world, can alter things to prevent her being slave to the right one. And if she can't have the right one? We've developed such a quality of preference." She rubbed her knuckles into her forehead. "Oh, but life is difficult," she groaned. "When you loosen the tangle in one place, you tie a knot in another. Before there is any change, any real change, I shall be dead, dead, dead and finished, 200 years." Part 5. One afternoon, while everything was still, the wardress heard her cry out suddenly and alarmingly, and with great and unmistakable passion, "Why in the name of goodness did I burn that £20?" Part 6. She sat regarding her dinner. The meat was coarse and disagreeably served. "I suppose someone makes a bit on the food," she said. "One has such ridiculous ideas of the wicked common people and the beautiful machinery of order that ropes them in. And here are these places, full of contagion. Of course, this is the real texture of life. This is what we refined, secure people forget. We think the whole thing is straight and noble at bottom, and it isn't. We think if we just defy the friends we have and go out into the world, everything will become easy and splendid. One doesn't realize that even the sort of civilization one has at Morningside Park is held together with difficulty. By policemen one mustn't shock. This isn't a world for an innocent girl to walk about in. It's a world of dirt and skin diseases and parasites. It's a world in which the law can be a stupid pig and the police stations dirty dens. One wants helpers and protectors. And clean water. Am I becoming reasonable, or am I being tamed? I'm simply discovering that life is many-sided and complex and puzzling. I thought one had only to take it by the throat. It hasn't got a throat." Part 7. One day the idea of self-sacrifice came into her head, and she made, she thought, some important moral discoveries. It came with an extreme effect of rediscovery, a remarkable novelty. "What have I been all this time?" she asked herself, and answered, "Just stark egotism, crude assertion of Ann Veronica, without a modest rag of religion or discipline or respect for authority to cover me." It seemed to her as though she had at last found the touchstone of conduct. She perceived she had never really thought of any one but herself in all her acts and plans. Even Capes had been for her merely an excitant to passionate love, a mere idol at whose feet one could enjoy imaginative wallowings. She had set out to get a beautiful life, a free, untrammelled life, self-development without counting the cost either for herself or others. "I have hurt my father," she said. "I have hurt my aunt. I have hurt and snubbed poor Teddy. I've made no one happy. I deserve pretty much what I've got. If only because of the way one hurts others if one kicks loose and free, one has to submit. Broken-in people. I suppose the world is just all egotistical children and broken-in people. Your little flag of pride must flutter down with the rest of them, Ann Veronica. Compromise and kindness. Compromise and kindness. Who are you that the world should lie down at your feet? You've got to be a decent citizen, Ann Veronica. Take your half-loaf with the others. You mustn't go clawing after a man that doesn't belong to you, that isn't even interested in you. That's one thing clear. You've got to take the decent, reasonable way. You've got to adjust yourself to the people God has set about you. Everyone else does." She thought more and more along that line. There was no reason why she shouldn't be Capes' friend. He did like her anyhow. He was always pleased to be with her. There was no reason why she shouldn't be his restrained and dignified friend. After all, that was life. Nothing was given away, and no one came so rich to the stall as to command all that it had to offer. Every one has to make a deal with the world. It would be very good to be Capes's friend. She might be able to go on with biology, possibly even work upon the same questions that he dealt with. Perhaps her granddaughter might marry his grandson. It grew clear to her that throughout all her wild raid for independence she had done nothing for anybody, and many people had done things for her. She thought of her aunt and that purse that was dropped on the table, of the many troublesome and ill-requited kindnesses, the thought of the help of the Widgetts, of Teddy's admiration. She thought with a new-born charity of her father, of Manning's conscientious unselfishness, of Miss Miniver's devotion. "And for me it has been pride and pride and pride. I am the prodigal daughter. I will arise and go to my father, and will say unto him, I suppose pride and self-assertion are sin. Sinned against heaven. Yes, I have sinned against heaven and before thee. Poor old Daddy! I wonder if he'll spend much on the fatted calf. The rapid life discipline! One comes to that at last. I begin to understand Jane Austen and chintz covers and decency and refinement and all the rest of it. One puts gloves on one's greedy fingers. One learns to sit up. And somehow or other," she added after a long interval, "I must pay Mr. Ramage back his £40." End of chapter 11. Ann Veronica by H.G. Wells. Chapter the 12th. Ann Veronica puts things in order. Part 1. Ann Veronica made a strenuous attempt to carry out her good resolutions. She meditated long and carefully upon her letter to her father before she wrote it, and gravely and deliberately again before she dispatched it. "My dear father," she wrote, "I have been thinking hard about everything since I was sent to this prison. All these experiences have taught me a great deal about life and realities. I see that compromise is more necessary to life than I ignorantly supposed it to be, and I have been trying to get Lord Morley's book on that subject, but it does not appear to be available in the prison library, and the chaplain seems to regard him as an undesirable writer." At this point she had perceived that she was drifting from her subject. "I must read him when I come out. But I see very clearly that as things are a daughter is necessarily dependent on her father and bound while she is in that position to live harmoniously with his ideals. "Bit starchy," said Ann Veronica, and altered the key abruptly. Her concluding paragraph was, on the whole, perhaps, hardly starchy enough. "Really, Daddy, I am sorry for all I have done to put you out. May I come home and try to be a better daughter to you? Ann Veronica." Part 2. Her aunt came to meet her outside Canongate, and, being a little confused between what was official and what was merely a rebellious slight upon our national justice, found herself involved in a triumphal procession to the Vindicator Vegetarian Restaurant, and was specifically and personally cheered by a small shabby crowd outside that rendezvous. They decided quite audibly, "She's an old dear, anyhow. Voting wouldn't do no harm to her." She was on the very verge of a vegetarian meal before she recovered her head again. Obeying some fine instinct, she had come to the prison in a dark veil, but she had pushed this up to kiss Ann Veronica, and never drawn it down again. Eggs were procured for her, and she sat out the subsequent emotions and eloquence with the dignity becoming an injured lady of good family. The quiet encounter and homecoming Ann Veronica and she had contemplated was entirely disorganized by this misadventure. There were no adequate explanations, and after they had settled things at Ann Veronica's lodgings, they reached home in the early afternoon, estranged and depressed, with headaches and the trumpet voice of the indomitable Kitty Brett still ringing in their ears. "Dreadful women, my dear," said Miss Stanley, "and some of them quite pretty and well dressed. No need to do such things. We must never let your father know we went. Why ever did you let me get into that wagonette?" "I thought we had to," said Ann Veronica, who had also been a little under the compulsion of the marshals of the occasion. "It was very tiring." "We will have some tea in the drawing-room as soon as ever we can, and I will take my things off. I don't think I shall ever care for this bonnet again. We'll have some buttered toast. Your poor cheeks are quite sunken and hollow." Part 3. When Ann Veronica found herself in her father's study that evening, it seemed to her for a moment as though all the events of the past 6 months had been a dream. The big grey spaces of London, the shop-lit, greasy, shining streets, had become very remote. The biological laboratory with its work and emotions, the meetings and discussions, the rides in hansoms with Ramage, were like things in a book, read and closed. The study seemed absolutely unaltered. There was still the same lamp with a little chip out of the shade, still the same gas fire, still the same bundle of blue and white papers, it seemed, with the same pink tape about them, at the elbow of the armchair, still the same father. He sat in much the same attitude, and she stood just as she had stood when he told her she could not go to the Fadden dance. Both had dropped the rather elaborate politeness of the dining-room, and in their faces an impartial observer would have discovered little lines of obstinate wilfulness in common, a certain hardness, sharp indeed in the father and softly rounded in the daughter, but hardness nevertheless, that made every compromise a bargain and every charity a discount. "And so you have been thinking," her father began, quoting her letter and looking over his slanting glasses at her. "Well, my girl, I wish you had thought about all these things before these bothers began." Ann Veronica perceived that she must not forget to remain eminently reasonable. "One has to live and learn," she remarked, with a passable imitation of her father's manner. "So long as you learn," said Mr. Stanley. Their conversation hung. "I suppose, Daddy, you've no objection to my going on with my work at the Imperial College?" she asked. "If it will keep you busy," he said, with a faintly ironical smile. "The fees are paid to the end of the session." He nodded twice with his eyes on the fire, as though that was a formal statement. "You may go on with that work," he said, "so long as you keep in harmony with things at home. I'm convinced that much of Russell's investigations are on wrong lines, unsound lines. Still, you must learn for yourself. You're of age. You're of age." "The work's almost essential for the Bachelor of Science exam." "It's scandalous, but I suppose it is." The agreement so far seemed remarkable, and yet as a homecoming the thing was a little lacking in warmth. But Ann Veronica had still to get to her chief topic. They were silent for a time. "It's a period of crude views and crude work," said Mr. Stanley. "Still, these Mendelian fellows seem likely to give Mr. Russell trouble, a good lot of trouble. Some of their specimens. Wonderfully selected, wonderfully got up." "Daddy," said Ann Veronica, "these affairs, being away from home has cost money. I thought you would find that out." "As a matter of fact, I happen to have got a little debt." "Never!" Her heart sank at the change in his expression. "Well, lodgings and things. And I paid my fees at the college." "Yes, but how could you get who gave you credit?" "You see," said Ann Veronica, "my landlady kept on my room while I was in Holloway, and the fees for the college mounted up pretty considerably." She spoke rather quickly, because she found her father's question the most awkward she had ever had to answer in her life. "Molly and you settled about the rooms. She said you had some money." "I borrowed it," said Ann Veronica in a casual tone, with white despair in her heart. "But who could have lent you money?" "I pawned my pearl necklace. I got £3, and there's 3 on my watch." £6. Got the tickets? Yes, but then you said you borrowed." "I did, too," said Ann Veronica. "Who from?" She met his eye for a second, and her heart failed her. The truth was impossible, indecent. If she mentioned Ramage he might have a fit. Anything might happen. She lied. "The Widgetts," she said. "Tut, tut," he said. "Really, Vee, you seem to have advertised our relations pretty generally." They knew, of course, because of the dance." She knew £40 was a quite impossible sum for their neighbors. She knew, too, she must not hesitate. £8, she plunged, and added foolishly, £15 will see me clear of everything." She muttered some unladylike comment upon herself under her breath, and engaged in secret additions. Mr. Stanley determined to improve the occasion. He seemed to deliberate. "Well," he said at last slowly, "I'll pay it. I'll pay it. But I do hope, Vee, I do hope this is the end of these adventures. I hope you have learned your lesson now and come to realize how things are. People, nobody can do as they like in this world. Everywhere there are limitations." "I know," said Ann Veronica. £15! "I have learned that. I mean to do what I can. £15. 15 from 40 is 25." He hesitated. She could think of nothing more to say. "Well," she achieved at last, "here goes for the new life." "Here goes for the new life," he echoed, and stood up. Father and daughter regarded each other warily, each more than a little insecure with the other. He made a movement toward her, and then recalled the circumstances of their last conversation in that study. She saw his purpose, and his doubt, hesitated also, and then went to him, took his coat lapels, and kissed him on the cheek. "Ah, Vee," he said, "that's better," and kissed her back rather clumsily. "We're going to be sensible." She disengaged herself from him and went out of the room with a grave, preoccupied expression. £15! And she wanted 40! Part 4. It was, perhaps, the natural consequence of a long and tiring and exciting day that Ann Veronica should pass a broken and distressful night, a night in which the noble and self-subduing resolutions of Canongate displayed themselves for the first time in an atmosphere of almost lurid dismay. Her father's peculiar stiffness of soul presented itself now as something altogether left out of the calculations upon which her plans were based, and, in particular, she had not anticipated the difficulty she would find in borrowing the £40 she needed for Ramage. That had taken her by surprise, and her tired wits had failed her. She was to have £15 and no more. She knew that to expect more now was like anticipating a gold mine in the garden. The chance had gone. It became suddenly glaringly apparent to her that it was impossible to return £15 or any sum less than £20 to Ramage. Absolutely impossible. She realized that with a pang of disgust and horror. Already she had sent him £20, and never written to explain to him why it was she had not sent it back sharply directly he returned it. She ought to have written at once and told him exactly what had happened. Now if she sent £15, the suggestion that she had spent a £5 note in the meanwhile would be irresistible. No, that was impossible. She would just have to keep the £15 until she could make it 20. That might happen on her birthday in August. She turned about and was persecuted by visions, half memories, half dreams of Ramage. He became ugly and monstrous, dunning her, threatening her, assailing her. "Confound sex from first to last," said Ann Veronica. "Why can't we propagate by sexless spores as the ferns do? We restrict each other, we badger each other. Friendship is poisoned and buried under it. I must pay off that £40. I must." For a time there seemed no comfort for her even in Capes. She was to see Capes to-morrow, but now, in this state of misery she had achieved, she felt assured he would turn his back upon her, take no notice of her at all. And if he didn't, what was the good of seeing him? "I wish he was a woman," she said. "Then I could make him my friend. I want him as my friend. I want to talk to him and go about with him. Just go about with him." She was silent for a time with her nose on the pillow, and that brought her to. "What's the good of pretending? I love him," she said aloud to the dim forms of her room, and repeated it, and went on to imagine herself doing acts of tragically dog-like devotion to the biologist, who, for the purposes of the drama, remained entirely unconscious of and indifferent to her proceedings. At last some anodyne formed itself from these exercises, and, with eyelashes wet with such feeble tears as only 3 o'clock in the morning pathos can distill, she fell asleep. Part 5. Pursuant to some altogether private calculations, she did not go up to the Imperial College until after midday, and she found the laboratory deserted, even as she desired. She went to the table under the end window at which she had been accustomed to work, and found it swept and garnished with full bottles of reagents. Everything was very neat. It had evidently been straightened up and kept for her. She put down the sketch-book and apparatus she had brought with her, pulled out her stool, and sat down. As she did so the preparation-room door opened behind her. She heard it open, but as she felt unable to look round in a careless manner, she pretended not to hear it. Then Capes' footsteps approached. She turned with an effort. "I expected you this morning," he said. "I saw they knocked off your fetters yesterday." "I think it is very good of me to come this afternoon." "I began to be afraid you might not come at all." "Afraid?" "Yes. I'm glad you're back for all sorts of reasons." He spoke a little nervously. "Among other things, you know, I didn't understand that you were so keenly interested in this suffrage question. I have it on my conscience that I offended you." "Offended me when?" "I've been haunted by the memory of you. I was rude and stupid. We were talking about the suffrage, and I rather scoffed." "You weren't rude," she said. "I didn't know you were so keen on this suffrage business." "Nor I. You haven't had it on your mind all this time." "I have rather. I felt somehow I'd hurt you." "You didn't. I hurt myself." "I mean?" "I behaved like an idiot, that's all. My nerves were in rags. I was worried. We're the hysterical animal, Mr. Capes. I got myself locked up, to cool off, by a sort of instinct, as a dog eats grass. I'm right again now." "Because your nerves were exposed, that was no excuse for my touching them. I ought to have seen—" "It doesn't matter a rap if you're not disposed to resent the way I behaved." I resent? I was only sorry I'd been so stupid." "Well, I take it we're straight again," said Capes with a note of relief, and assumed an easier position on the edge of her table. "But if you weren't keen on the suffrage business, why on earth did you go to prison?" Ann Veronica reflected. "It was a phase," she said. He smiled. "It's a new phase in the life history," he remarked. "Everybody seems to have it now. Everybody who's going to develop into a woman." "There's Miss Garvice." "She's coming on," said Capes. "And you know, you're altering us all. I'm shaken. The campaign's a success." He met her questioning eye and repeated, "Oh, it is a success. A man is so apt to take women a little too lightly, unless they remind him now and then not to. You did." "Then I didn't waste my time in prison altogether." "It wasn't the prison impressed me, but I liked the things you said here. I felt suddenly I understood you, as an intelligent person, if you'll forgive my saying that, and implying what goes with it. There's something puppyish in a man's usual attitude to women. That is what I've had on my conscience. I don't think we're altogether to blame if we don't take some of your lot seriously. Some of your sex, I mean. But we smirk a little, I'm afraid, habitually when we talk to you. We smirk, and we're a bit furtive." He paused, with his eyes studying her gravely. "You, anyhow, don't deserve it," he said. Their colloquy was ended abruptly by the apparition of Miss Klegg at the further door. When she saw Ann Veronica, she stood for a moment as if entranced, and then advanced with outstretched hands. "Veronique!" she cried with a rising intonation, though never before had she called Ann Veronica anything but Miss Stanley, and seized her and squeezed her and kissed her with profound emotion. "To think that you were going to do it, and never said a word! You are a little thin, but except for that you look better than ever. Was it very horrible? I tried to get into the police court, but the crowd was ever so much too big, push as I would. I mean to go to prison directly the session is over," said Miss Klegg. "Wild horses! Not if they have all the mounted police in London, shan't keep me out." Part 6. Capes lit things wonderfully for Ann Veronica all that afternoon. He was so friendly, so palpably interested in her and glad to have her back with him. Tea in the laboratory was a sort of suffragette reception. Miss Garvice assumed a quality of neutrality, professed herself almost won over by Ann Veronica's example, and the Scotchman decided that if women had a distinctive sphere, it was at any rate an enlarging sphere, and no one who believed in the doctrine of evolution could logically deny the vote to women ultimately, however much they might be disposed to doubt the advisability of its immediate concession. It was a refusal of expediency, he said, and not an absolute refusal. The youth with his hair like Russell cleared his throat and said irrelevantly that he knew a man who knew Thomas Bayard Simmons, who had rioted in the Strangers' Gallery. And then Capes, finding them all distinctly pro-Ann Veronica, if not pro-feminist, ventured to be perverse, and started a vein of speculation upon the Scotchman's idea that there were still hopes of women evolving into something higher. He was unusually absurd and ready, and all the time it seemed to Ann Veronica as a delightful possibility, as a thing not indeed to be entertained seriously, but to be half furtively felt, that he was being so agreeable because she had come back again. She returned home through a world that was as roseate as it had been grey overnight. But as she got out of the train at Morningside Park Station she had a shock. She saw, 20 yards down the platform, the shiny hat and broad back and inimitable swagger of Ramage. She dived at once behind the cover of the lamp-room and affected serious trouble with her shoelace until he was out of the station, and then she followed slowly and with extreme discretion until the bifurcation of the avenue from the Fieldway ensured her escape. Ramage went up the avenue, and she hurried along the path with a beating heart and a disagreeable sense of unsolved problems in her mind. "That thing's going on," she told herself. "Everything goes on, confound it. One doesn't change anything one has set going by making good resolutions." And then ahead of her she saw the radiant and welcoming figure of Manning. He came as an agreeable diversion from an insoluble perplexity. She smiled at the sight of him, and thereat his radiation increased. "I missed the hour of your release," he said, "but I was at the Vindicator restaurant. You did not see me, I know. I was among the common herd in the place below. But I took good care to see you." "Of course you're converted," she said. "To the view that all those splendid women in the movement ought to have votes? Rather! Who could help it?" He towered up over her and smiled down at her in his fatherly way. "To the view that all women ought to have votes whether they like it or not." He shook his head, and his eyes and the mouth under the black moustache wrinkled with his smile. And as he walked by her side they began a wrangle that was none the less pleasant to Ann Veronica because it served to banish a disagreeable preoccupation. It seemed to her in her restored geniality that she liked Manning extremely. The brightness Capes had diffused over the world glorified even his rival. Part 7. The steps by which Ann Veronica determined to engage herself to marry Manning were never very clear to her. A medley of motives warred in her, and it was certainly not one of the least of these that she knew herself to be passionately in love with Capes. At moments she had a giddy intimation that he was beginning to feel keenly interested in her. She realized more and more the quality of the brink upon which she stood, the dreadful readiness with which in certain moods she might plunge, the unmitigated wrongness and recklessness of such a self-abandonment. "He must never know," she would whisper to herself. "He must never know, or else it will be impossible that I can be his friend." That simple statement of the case was by no means all that went on in Ann Veronica's mind. But it was the form of her ruling determination. It was the only form that she ever allowed to see daylight. What else was there lurked in shadows and deep places? If in some mood of reverie it came out into the light, it was presently overwhelmed and hustled back into hiding. She would never look squarely at these dream forms that mocked the social order in which she lived, never admit she listened to the soft whisperings in her ear. But Manning seemed more and more clearly indicated as a refuge, as security. Certain simple purposes emerged from the disingenuous muddle of her feelings and desires. Seeing Capes from day to day made a bright eventfulness that hampered her in the course she had resolved to follow. She vanished from the laboratory for a week of oddly interesting days. When she renewed her attendance at the Imperial College, the third finger of her left hand was adorned with a very fine old ring with dark blue sapphires that had once belonged to a great-aunt of Manning's. That ring manifestly occupied her thoughts a great deal. She kept pausing in her work and regarding it, and when Capes came round to her, she first put her hand in her lap, and then rather awkwardly in front of him. But men are often blind to rings. He seemed to be. In the afternoon she had considered certain doubts very carefully, and decided on a more emphatic course of action. "Are these ordinary sapphires?" she said. He bent to her hand, and she slipped off the ring and gave it to him to examine. "Very good," he said. "Rather darker than most of them, but I'm generously ignorant of gems. Is it an old ring?" he asked, returning it. "I believe it is. It's an engagement ring." She slipped it on her finger, and added in a voice she tried to make matter of fact, "It was given to me last week." "Oh," he said, in a colorless tone and with his eyes on her face. "Yes, last week." She glanced at him, and it was suddenly apparent for one instant of illumination that this ring upon her finger was the crowning blunder of her life. It was apparent, and then it faded into the quality of an inevitable necessity. "Odd," he remarked, rather surprisingly, after a little interval. There was a brief pause, a crowded pause, between them. She sat very still, and his eyes rested on that ornament for a moment, and then travelled slowly to her wrist and the soft lines of her forearm. "I suppose I ought to congratulate you," he said. Their eyes met, and his expressed perplexity and curiosity. The fact is, I don't know why. This takes me by surprise. Somehow I haven't connected the idea with you. You seemed complete without that." "Did I?" she said. "I don't know why, but this is like walking round a house that looks square and complete and finding an unexpected long wing running out behind." She looked up at him and found he was watching her closely. For some seconds of voluminous thinking they looked at the ring between them, and neither spoke. Then Capes shifted his eyes to her microscope and the little trays of unmounted sections beside it. "How's that carmine working?" he asked, with a forced interest. "Better," said Ann Veronica, with an unreal alacrity. "But it still misses the nucleolus." End of chapter 12. Ann Veronica by H. G. Wells. Chapter the 13th. The Sapphire Ring. Part 1. For a time that ring set with sapphires seemed to be, after all, the satisfactory solution of Ann Veronica's difficulties. It was like pouring a strong acid over dulled metal. A tarnish of constraint that had recently spread over her intercourse with Capes vanished again. They embarked upon an open and declared friendship. They even talked about friendship. They went to the Zoological Gardens together one Saturday to see for themselves a point of morphological interest about the toucan's bill, that friendly and entertaining bird, and they spent the rest of the afternoon walking about and elaborating in general terms this theme and the superiority of intellectual fellowship to all merely passionate relationships. Upon this topic Capes was heavy and conscientious, but that seemed to her to be just exactly what he ought to be. He was also, had she known it, more than a little insincere. "We are only in the dawn of the age of friendship," he said, "when interest, I suppose, will take the place of passions. Either you have had to love people or hate them, which is a sort of love, too, in its way, to get anything out of them. Now, more and more, we're going to be interested in them, to be curious about them, and quite mildly experimental with them." He seemed to be elaborating ideas as he talked. They watched the chimpanzees in the new apes' house and admired the gentle humanity of their eyes, so much more human than human beings, and they watched the agile gibbon in the next apartment doing wonderful leaps and aerial somersaults. "I wonder which of us enjoys that the most," said Capes. "Does he, or do we?" "He seems to get a zest." "He does it and forgets it. We remember it. These joyful bounds just lace into the stuff of my memories and stay there forever. Living's just material." "It's very good to be alive." "It's better to know life than be life." "One may do both," said Ann Veronica. She was in a very uncritical state that afternoon. When he said, "Let's go and see the wart-hog," she thought no one ever had had so quick a flow of good ideas as he, and when he explained that sugar and not buns was the talisman of popularity among the animals, she marvelled at his practical omniscience. Finally, at the exit into Regent's Park, they ran against Miss Klegg. It was the expression of Miss Clegg's face that put the idea into Ann Veronica's head of showing Manning at the college one day, an idea which she didn't for some reason or other carry out for a fortnight. Part 2. When at last she did so, the sapphire ring took on a new quality in the imagination of Capes. It ceased to be the symbol of liberty and a remote and quite abstracted person, and became suddenly and very disagreeably the token of a large and portentous body, visible and tangible. Manning appeared just at the end of the afternoon's work, and the biologist was going through some perplexities the Scotchman had created by a metaphysical treatment of the skulls of Hyrax and a young African elephant. He was clearing up these difficulties by tracing a partially obliterated suture the Scotchman had overlooked, when the door from the passage opened, and Manning came into his universe. Seen down the length of the laboratory, Manning looked a very handsome and shapely gentleman indeed, and at the sight of his eager advance to his fiancée, Miss Klegg replaced one long-cherished romance about Ann Veronica by one more normal and simple. He carried a cane and a silk hat with a mourning band in one gray-gloved hand. His frock coat and trousers were admirable. His handsome face, his black moustache, his prominent brow conveyed an eager solicitude. "I want," he said, with a white hand outstretched, "to take you out to tea." "I've been clearing up," said Ann Veronica, brightly. "All your dreadful scientific things," he said, with a smile that Miss Klegg thought extraordinary kindly. "All my dreadful scientific things," said Ann Veronica. He stood back, smiling with an air of proprietorship, and looking about him at the business-like equipment of the room. The low ceiling made him seem abnormally tall. Ann Veronica wiped a scalpel, put a card over a watch-glass containing thin shreds of embryonic guinea pig swimming in mauve stain, and dismantled her microscope. "I wish I understood more of biology," said Manning. "I'm ready," said Ann Veronica, closing her microscope box with a click, and looking for one brief instant up the laboratory. "We have no airs and graces here, and my hat hangs from a peg in the passage." She led the way to the door, and Manning passed behind her and round her and opened the door for her. When Capes glanced up at them for a moment, Manning seemed to be holding his arms all about her, and there was nothing but quiet acquiescence in her bearing. After Capes had finished the Scotchman's troubles, he went back into the preparation room. He sat down on the sill of the open window, folded his arms, and stared straight before him for a long time over the wilderness of tiles and chimney-pots into a sky that was blue and empty. He was not addicted to monologue, and the only audible comment he permitted himself at first upon a universe that was evidently anything but satisfactory to him that afternoon was one compact and entirely unassigned "Damn!" The word must have had some gratifying quality, because he repeated it. Then he stood up and repeated it again. "The fool I have been!" he cried, and now speech was coming to him. He tried this sentence with expletives. "Ass!" he went on, still warming. "Muck-headed moral ass! I ought to have done anything. I ought to have done anything. What's a man for? Friendship!" He doubled up his fist and seemed to contemplate thrusting it through the window. He turned his back on that temptation. Then suddenly he seized a new preparation bottle that stood upon his table and contained the better part of a week's work, a displayed dissection of a snail, beautifully done, and hurled it across the room to smash resoundingly upon the cemented floor under the bookcase. Then, without either haste or pause, he swept his arm along a shelf of reagents and sent them to mingle with the debris on the floor. They fell in a diapason of smashes. He said, regarding the wreckage with a calmer visage. "Silly," he remarked after a pause. "One hardly knows. All the time." He put his hands in his pockets, his mouth puckered to a whistle, and he went to the door of the outer preparation room and stood there, looking, save for the faintest intensification of his natural ruddiness, the embodiment of blonde serenity. "Gellett," he called, "just come and clear up a mess, will you? I've smashed some things." Part 3. There was one serious flaw in Ann Veronica's arrangements for self-rehabilitation, and that was Ramage. He hung over her, he and his loan to her and his connection with her and that terrible evening, a vague, disconcerting possibility of annoyance and exposure. She could not see any relief from this anxiety except repayment, and repayment seemed impossible. The raising of £25 was a task altogether beyond her powers. Her birthday was 4 months away, and that, at its extremest point, might give her another £5. The thing rankled in her mind night and day. She would wake in the night to repeat her bitter cry, "Oh, why did I burn those notes?" It added greatly to the annoyance of the situation that she had twice seen Ramage in the avenue since her return to the shelter of her father's roof. He had saluted her with elaborate civility, his eyes distended with indecipherable meanings. She felt she was bound in honor to tell the whole affair to Manning sooner or later. Indeed, it seemed inevitable that she must clear it up with his assistance, or not at all. And when Manning was not about, the thing seemed simple enough. She would compose extremely lucid and honorable explanations. But when it came to broaching them, it proved to be much more difficult than she had supposed. They went down the great staircase of the building, and, while she sought in her mind for a beginning, he broke into appreciation of her simple dress and self-congratulations upon their engagement. "It makes me feel," he said, "that nothing is impossible. To have you here beside me. I said that day at Surbiton, 'There's many good things in life, but there's only one best, and that's the wild-haired girl who's pulling away at that oar. I will make her my Grail, and some day, perhaps, if God wills, she shall become my wife.'" He looked very hard before him as he said this, and his voice was full of deep feeling. "Grail!" said Ann Veronica, and then, "Oh, yes, of course. Anything but a holy one, I'm afraid." "Altogether holy, Ann Veronica. Ah, but you can't imagine what you are to me, and what you mean to me. I suppose there is something mystical and wonderful about all women." "There is something mystical and wonderful about all human beings. I don't see that men need banquet with the women." "A man does," said Manning. "A true man, anyhow. And for me there is only one treasure house. By Jove, when I think of it, I want to leap and shout." "It would astonish that man with the barrow." "It astonishes me that I don't," said Manning, in a tone of intense self-enjoyment. "I think," began Ann Veronica, "that you don't realize—" He disregarded her entirely. He waved an arm and spoke with peculiar resonance. "I feel like a giant. I believe now I shall do great things. Gods, what it must be to pour out strong, splendid verse. Mighty lines, mighty lines. If I do, Ann Veronica, it will be you. It will be altogether you. I will dedicate my books to you. I will lay them all at your feet." He beamed upon her. "I don't think you realize," Ann Veronica began again, "that I am rather a defective human being." "I don't want to," said Manning. "They say there are spots on the sun. Not for me. It warms me and lights me and fills my world with flowers. Why should I peep at it through smoked glass to see things that don't affect me?" He smiled his delight at his companion. "I've got bad faults." He shook his head slowly, smiling mysteriously. "But perhaps I want to confess them." "I grant you absolution." "I don't want absolution. I want to make myself visible to you." "I wish I could make you visible to yourself. I don't believe in the faults. They're just a joyous softening of the outline, more beautiful than perfection, like the flaws of an old marble. If you talk of your faults, I shall talk of your splendors." "I do want to tell you things, nevertheless." "We'll have, thank God, 10 myriad days to tell each other things. When I think of it... But these are things I want to tell you now." "I made a little song of it. Let me say it to you. I've no name for it yet. Epithalamy might do. Like him who stood on Darien, I view uncharted sea, 10,000 days, 10,000 nights, before my queen and me. And that only brings me up to about 65. A glittering wilderness of time, that to the sunset reaches, no keel as yet its waves has ploughed or gritted on its beaches, and we will sail that splendor wide from day to day together, from isle to isle of happiness, through years of God's own weather." "Yes," said his prospective fellow-sailor, "that's very pretty." She stopped short, full of things unsaid. Pretty! 10,000 days, 10,000 nights. "You shall tell me your faults," said Manning. "If they matter to you, they matter." "It isn't precisely faults," said Ann Veronica. "It's something that bothers me." 10,000! Put that way, it seemed so different. "Then assuredly," said Manning. She found a little difficulty in beginning. She was glad when he went on. "I want to be your city of refuge from every sort of bother. I want to stand between you and all the force and vileness of the world. I want to make you feel that here is a place where the crowd does not clamor, nor ill winds blow." "That is all very well," said Ann Veronica, unheeded. "That is my dream of you," said Manning, warming. "I want my life to be beaten gold just in order to make it a fitting setting for yours. There you will be in an inner temple. I want to enrich it with hangings and gladden it with verses. I want to fill it with fine and precious things, and by degrees, perhaps, that maiden distrust of yours that makes you shrink from my kisses will vanish. Forgive me if a certain warmth creeps into my words. The park is green and grey to-day, but I am glowing pink and gold. It is difficult to express these things." Part 4. They sat with tea and strawberries and cream before them at a little table in front of the pavilion in Regent's Park. Her confession was still unmade. Manning leaned forward on the table, talking discursively on the probable brilliance of their married life. Ann Veronica sat back in an attitude of inattention, her eyes on a distant game of cricket, her mind perplexed and busy. She was recalling the circumstances under which she had engaged herself to Manning, and trying to understand a curious development of the quality of this relationship. The particulars of her engagement were very clear in her memory. She had taken care he should have this momentous talk with her on a garden seat commanded by the windows of the house. They had been playing tennis, with his manifest intention looming over her. "Let us sit down for a moment," he had said. He made his speech a little elaborately. She plucked at the knots of her racket and heard him to the end, then spoke in a restrained undertone. "You ask me to be engaged to you, Mr. Manning," she began. "I want to lay all my life at your feet." "Mr. Manning, I do not think I love you. I want to be very plain with you. I have nothing, nothing that can possibly be passion for you. I am sure. Nothing at all." He was silent for some moments. "Perhaps that is only sleeping," he said. "How can you know?" "I think perhaps I am rather a cold-blooded person." She stopped. He remained listening attentively. "You have been very kind to me," she said. "I would give my life for you." Her heart had warmed toward him. It had seemed to her that life might be very good indeed with his kindliness and sacrifice about her. She thought of him as always courteous and helpful, as realizing indeed his ideal of protection and service, as chivalrously leaving her free to live her own life, rejoicing with an infinite generosity in every detail of her irresponsive being. She twanged the catgut under her fingers. "It seems so unfair," she said, "to take all you offer me and give so little in return." "It is all the world to me, and we are not traders looking at equivalents." "You know, Mr. Manning, I do not really want to marry." "No." "It seems so unworthy," she picked among her phrases, "of the noble love you give." She stopped through the difficulty she found in expressing herself. "But I am judge of that," said Manning. "Would you wait for me?" Manning was silent for a space. "As my lady wills." "Would you let me go on studying for a time?" "If you order patience." "I think, Mr. Manning, I do not know. It is so difficult. When I think of the love you give me, one ought to give you back love." "You like me?" "Yes, and I'm grateful to you." Manning tapped with his racket on the turf through some moments of silence. "You are the most perfect, the most glorious of created things, tender, frank intellectual, brave, beautiful. I am your servitor. I am ready to wait for you, to wait your pleasure, to give all my life to winning it. Let me only wear your livery. Give me but leave to try. You want to think for a time, to be free for a time. That is so like you, Diana, Pallas Athene. Pallas Athene is better. You are all the slender goddesses. I understand. Let me engage myself. That is all I ask." She looked at him. His face, downcast and in profile, was handsome and strong. Her gratitude swelled within her. "You are too good for me," she said in a low voice. "Then you will?" A long pause. "It isn't fair." "But will you?" "Yes." For some seconds he had remained quite still. "If I sit here," he said, standing up before her abruptly, "I shall have to shout. Let us walk about. Tum tum tirray tum 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 ta-dum. That thing of Mendelssohn's. If making one human being absolutely happy is any satisfaction to you." He held out his hands, and she also stood up. He drew her close up to him with a strong, steady pull. Then suddenly, in front of all those windows, he folded her in his arms and pressed her to him, and kissed her unresisting face. "Don't!" cried Ann Veronica, struggling faintly, and he released her. "Forgive me," he said, "but I am at singing pitch." She had a moment of sheer panic at the thing she had done. "Mr. Manning," she said, "for a time, will you tell no one? Will you keep this our secret? I'm doubtful. Will you please not even tell my aunt?" "As you will," he said. "But if my manner tells, I cannot help it if that shows. You only mean a secret for a little time?" "Just for a little time," she said. "Yes." But the ring and her aunt's triumphant eye, and a note of approval in her father's manner, and a novel disposition in him to praise Manning in a just, impartial voice, had soon placed very definite qualifications upon that covenanted secrecy. Part 5. At first the quality of her relationship to Manning seemed moving and beautiful to Ann Veronica. She admired and rather pitied him, and she was unfeignedly grateful to him. She even thought that perhaps she might come to love him, in spite of that faint, indefinable flavor of absurdity that pervaded his courtly bearing. She would never love him as she loved Capes, of course, but there are grades and qualities of love. For Manning it would be a more temperate love altogether, much more temperate, the discreet and joyless love of a virtuous, reluctant, condescending wife. She had been quite convinced that an engagement with him, and at last a marriage, had exactly that quality of compromise which distinguishes the ways of the wise. It would be the rapid world almost at its best. She saw herself building up a life upon that, a life restrained, kindly, beautiful, a little pathetic, and altogether dignified, a life of great disciplines and suppressions and extensive reserves. But the Ramage affair needed clearing up, of course. It was a flaw upon that project. She had to explain about and pay off that £40. Then, quite insensibly, her queenliness had declined. She was never able to trace the changes her attitude had undergone, from the time when she believed herself to be the pampered queen of fortune, the crown of a good man's love, and secretly but nobly worshipping someone else, to the time when she realized she was in fact just a mannequin for her lover's imagination, and that he cared no more for the realities of her being, for the things she felt and desired, for the passions and dreams that might move her, than a child cares for the sawdust in its doll. She was the actress his whim had chosen to play a passive part. It was one of the most educational disillusionments in Ann Veronica's career. But did many women get anything better? This afternoon, when she was urgent to explain her hampering and tainting complication with Ramage, the realization of this alien quality in her relationship with Manning became acute. Hitherto it had been qualified by her conception of all life as a compromise, by her new effort to be unexacting of life. But she perceived that to tell Manning of her Ramage adventures as they had happened would be like tarring figures upon a water-color. They were in different key, they had a different timbre. How could she tell him what indeed already began to puzzle herself? Why she had borrowed that money at all? The plain fact was that she had grabbed a bait. She had grabbed! She became less and less attentive to his meditative, self-complacent fragments of talk as she told herself this. Her secret thoughts made some hasty, half-hearted excursions into the possibility of telling the thing in romantic tones. Ramage was as a black villain, she as a white, fantastically white, maiden. She doubted if Manning would even listen to that. He would refuse to listen and absolve her unshriven. Then it came to her with a shock, as an extraordinary oversight, that she could never tell Manning about Ramage. Never. She dismissed the idea of doing so. But that still left the £40. Her mind went on generalizing. So it would always be between herself and Manning. She saw her life before her robbed of all generous illusions, the rapid life unwrappered forever, vistas of dull responses, crises of make-believe, years of exacting mutual disregard in a misty garden of fine sentiments. But did any woman get anything better from a man? Perhaps every woman conceals herself from a man perforce. She thought of Capes. She could not help thinking of Capes. Surely Capes was different. Capes looked at one and not over one, spoke to one, treated one as a visible, concrete fact. Capes saw her, felt for her, cared for her greatly, even if he did not love her. Anyhow, he did not sentimentalize her. And she had been doubting since that walk in the Zoological Gardens whether, indeed, he did simply care for her. Little things, almost impalpable, had happened to justify that doubt. Something in his manner had belied his words. Did he not look for her in the morning when she entered, come very quickly to her? She thought of him as she had last seen him, looking down the length of the laboratory to see her go. Why had he glanced up quite in that way? The thought of Capes flooded her being like long-veiled sunlight breaking again through clouds. It came to her like a dear thing rediscovered, that she loved Capes. It came to her that to marry any one but Capes was impossible. If she could not marry him, she would not marry any one. She would end this sham with Manning. It ought never to have begun. It was cheating, pitiful cheating. And then, if some day Capes wanted her, saw fit to alter his views upon friendship. Dim possibilities that she would not seem to look at even to herself gesticulated in the twilight background of her mind. She leapt suddenly at a desperate resolution, and in one moment had made it into a new self. She flung aside every plan she had in life, every discretion. Of course, why not? She would be honest anyhow. She turned her eyes to Manning. He was sitting back from the table now, with one arm over the back of his green chair and the other resting on the little table. He was smiling under his heavy moustache, and his head was a little on one side as he looked at her. "And what was that dreadful confession you had to make?" he was saying. His quiet, kindly smile implied his serene disbelief in any confessable thing. Ann Veronica pushed aside a teacup and the vestiges of her strawberries and cream, and put her elbows before her on the table. "Mr. Manning," she said, "I have a confession to make." "I wish you would use my Christian name," he said. She attended to that, and then dismissed it as unimportant. Something in her voice and manner conveyed an effect of unwonted gravity to him. For the first time he seemed to wonder what it might be that she had to confess. His smile faded. "I don't think our engagement can go on," she plunged, and felt exactly that loss of breath that comes with a dive into icy water. "But how?" he said, sitting up astonished beyond measure. "Not go on?" "I have been thinking while you have been talking. You see, I didn't understand." She stared hard at her fingernails. "It is hard to express oneself, but I do want to be honest with you. When I promised to marry you I thought I could. I thought it was a possible arrangement. I did think it could be done. I admired your chivalry. I was grateful." She paused. "Go on," he said. She moved her elbow nearer to him, and spoke in a still lower tone. "I told you I did not love you." "I know," said Manning, nodding gravely. "It was fine and brave of you." "But there is something more." She paused again. I'm sorry. I didn't explain. These things are difficult. It wasn't clear to me that I had to explain. I love someone else." They remained looking at each other for 3 or 4 seconds. Then Manning flopped back in his chair and dropped his chin like a man shot. There was a long silence between them. "My God!" he said at last, with tremendous feeling, and then again, "My God!" Now that this thing was said, her mind was clear and calm. She heard this standard expression of a strong soul wrung with a critical coldness that astonished herself. She realized dimly that there was no personal thing behind his cry, that countless myriads of Mannings had "My Godded" with an equal gusto at situations as flatly apprehended. This mitigated her remorse enormously. He rested his brow on his hand and conveyed magnificent tragedy by his pose. "But why?" he said in the gasping voice of one subduing an agony, and looked at her from under a pain-wrinkled brow. "Why did you not tell me this before?" "I didn't know. I thought I might be able to control myself." "And you can't?" "I don't think I ought to control myself. And I have been dreaming and thinking. I am frightfully sorry." "But this bolt from the blue! My God! Ann Veronica, you don't understand. This shatters a world." She tried to feel sorry, but her sense of his immense egotism was strong and clear. He went on with intense urgency. "Why did you ever let me love you? Why did you ever let me peep through the gates of paradise? Oh, my God! I don't begin to feel and realize this yet. It seems to me just talk. It seems to me like the fancy of a dream. Tell me I haven't heard. This is a joke of yours." He made his voice very low and full, and looked closely into her face. She twisted her fingers tightly. "It isn't a joke," she said. "I feel shabby and disgraced. I ought never to have thought of it. Of you, I mean." He fell back in his chair with an expression of tremendous desolation. "My God!" he said again. They became aware of the waitress standing over them with book and pencil ready for their bill. "Never mind the bill," said Manning tragically, standing up and thrusting a 4-shilling piece into her hand and turning a broad back on her astonishment. "Let us walk across the park at least," he said to Ann Veronica. "Just at present my mind simply won't take hold of this at all. I tell you, never mind the bill. Keep it, keep it." Part 6. They walked a long way that afternoon. They crossed the park to the westward, and then turned back and walked round the circle about the Royal Botanical Gardens, and then southwardly toward Waterloo. They trudged and talked, and Manning struggled, as he said, to get the hang of it all. It was a long, meandering talk, stupid, shameful, and unavoidable. Ann Veronica was apologetic to the bottom of her soul. At the same time she was wildly exultant at the resolution she had taken, the end she had made to her blunder. She had only to get through this, to solace Manning as much as she could, to put such clumsy plasterings on his wounds as were possible, and then, anyhow, she would be free, free to put her fate to the test. She made a few protests, a few excuses for her action in accepting him, a few lame explanations, but he did not heed them or care for them. Then she realized that it was her business to let Manning talk and impose his own interpretations upon the situations so far as he was concerned. She did her best to do this, but about his unknown rival he was acutely curious. He made her tell him the core of the difficulty. "I cannot say who he is," said Ann Veronica, "but he is a married man. No, I do not even know that he cares for me. It is no good going into that. Only I just want him. I just want him, and no one else will do. It is no good arguing about a thing like that." "But you thought you could forget him?" "I suppose I must have thought so. I didn't understand. Now I do." "By God!" said Manning, making the most of the word. "I suppose it's fate. Fate! You are so frank, so splendid." "I'm taking this calmly now," he said, almost as if he apologized, "because I'm a little stunned." Then he asked, "Tell me, has this man, has he dared to make love to you?" Ann Veronica had a vicious moment. "I wish he had," she said. "But—" The long and consecutive conversation by that time was getting on her nerves. "When one wants a thing more than anything else in the world," she said with outrageous frankness, "one naturally wishes one had it." She shocked him by that. She shattered the edifice he was building up of himself as a devoted lover, waiting only his chance to win her from a hopeless and consuming passion. "Mr. Manning," she said, "I warned you not to idealize me. Men ought not to idealize any woman. We aren't worth it. We've done nothing to deserve it. And it hampers us. You don't know the thoughts we have, the things we can do and say. You are a sisterless man. You have never heard the ordinary talk that goes on at a girls' boarding school." "Oh, but you are splendid and open and fearless. As if I couldn't allow. What are all these little things? Nothing. Nothing. You can't sully yourself. You can't. I tell you frankly, you may break off your engagement to me. I shall hold myself still engaged to you, yours just the same. As for this infatuation, it's like some obsession, some magic thing laid upon you. It's not you, not a bit. It's a thing that's happened to you. It is like some accident. I don't care. In a sense, I don't care. It makes no difference. All the same, I wish I had that fellow by the throat. Just the virile, unregenerate man in me wishes that. I suppose I should let go if I had. You know," he went on, "this doesn't seem to me to end anything. I'm rather a persistent person. I'm the sort of dog, if you turn it out of the room it lies down on the mat at the door. I'm not a lovesick boy. I'm a man, and I know what I mean. It's a tremendous blow, of course, but it doesn't kill me. And the situation it makes, the situation!" Thus Manning, egotistical, inconsecutive, unreal. And Ann Veronica walked beside him, trying in vain to soften her heart to him by the thought of how she had ill-used him, and all the time as her feet and mind grew weary together, rejoicing more and more that at the cost of this one interminable walk she escaped the prospect of, what was it? 10,000 days, 10,000 nights in his company. Whatever happened, she need never return to that possibility. "For me," Manning went on, "this isn't final. In a sense it alters nothing. I shall still wear your favor, even if it is a stolen and forbidden favor, in my casque. I shall still believe in you, trust you." He repeated several times that he would trust her, though it remained obscure just exactly where the trust came in. "Look here!" he cried out of a silence, with a sudden flash of understanding. "Did you mean to throw me over when you came out with me this afternoon?" Ann Veronica hesitated, and with a startled mind realized the truth. "No," she answered, reluctantly. "Very well," said Manning. "Then I don't take this as final. That's all. I've bored you or something. You think you love this other man. No doubt you do love him. Before you have lived—" He became darkly prophetic. He thrust out a rhetorical hand. "I will make you love me, until he has faded into a memory." He saw her into the train at Waterloo, and stood, a tall, grave figure, with hat upraised, as the carriage moved forward slowly and hid him. Ann Veronica sat back with a sigh of relief. Manning might go on now, idealizing her as much as he liked. She was no longer a confederate in that. He might go on as the devoted lover until he tired. She had done forever with the age of chivalry, and her own base adaptations of its traditions to the compromising life. She was honest again. But when she turned her thoughts to Morningside Park, she perceived the tangled skein of life was now to be further complicated by his romantic importunity. End of chapter 13. Ann Veronica by H. G. Wells. Chapter the 14th. The Collapse of the Penitent. Part 1. Spring had held back that year until the dawn of May, and then spring and summer came with a rush together. 2 days after this conversation between Manning and Ann Veronica, Capes came into the laboratory at lunch-time and found her alone there standing by the open window, and not even pretending to be doing anything. He came in with his hands in his trousers pockets and a general air of depression in his bearing. He was engaged in detesting Manning and himself in almost equal measure. His face brightened at the sight of her, and he came toward her. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Nothing," said Ann Veronica, and stared over her shoulder out of the window. "So am I. Lassitude?" "I suppose so." "I can't work." "Nor I," said Ann Veronica. Pause. "It's the spring," he said. "It's the warming up of the year, the coming of the light mornings, the way in which everything begins to run about and begin new things. Work becomes distasteful. One thinks of holidays. This year I've got it badly. I want to get away. I've never wanted to get away so much." "Where do you go?" "Oh, Alps." "Climbing?" "Yes." "That's rather a fine sort of holiday." He made no answer for 3 or 4 seconds. "Yes," he said, "I want to get away. I feel at moments as though I could bolt for it. Silly, isn't it? Undisciplined." He went to the window and fidgeted with the blind, looking out to where the tree-tops of Regent's Park showed distantly over the houses. He turned round toward her and found her looking at him and standing very still. "It's the stir of spring," he said. "I believe it is." She glanced out of the window, and the distant trees were a froth of hard spring green and almond blossom. She formed a wild resolution, and, lest she should waver from it, she set about at once to realize it. "I've broken off my engagement," she said, in a matter-of-fact tone, and found her heart thumping in her neck. He moved slightly, and she went on, with a slight catching of her breath. "It's a bother and disturbance, but you see—" She had to go through with it now, because she could think of nothing but her preconceived words. Her voice was weak and flat. "I've fallen in love." He never helped her by a sound. I didn't love the man I was engaged to," she said. She met his eyes for a moment and could not interpret their expression. They struck her as cold and indifferent. Her heart failed her, and her resolution became water. She remained standing stiffly, unable even to move. She could not look at him through an interval that seemed to her a vast gulf of time, but she felt his lax figure become rigid. At last his voice came to release her tension. "I thought you weren't keeping up to the mark. It's jolly of you to confide in me. Still—" Then, with incredible and obviously deliberate stupidity, and a voice as flat as her own, he asked, "Who is the man?" Her spirit raged within her at the dumbness, the paralysis that had fallen upon her. Grace, confidence, the power of movement even, seemed gone from her. A fever of shame ran through her being. Horrible doubts assailed her. She sat down awkwardly and helplessly on one of the little stools by her table and covered her face with her hands. "Can't you see how things are?" she said. Part 2. Before Capes could answer her in any way, the door at the end of the laboratory opened noisily, and Miss Klegg appeared. She went to her own table and sat down. At the sound of the door Ann Veronica uncovered a tearless face, and with one swift movement assumed a conversational attitude. Things hung for a moment in an awkward silence. "You see," said Ann Veronica, staring before her at the window sash, "that's the form my question takes at the present time." Capes had not quite the same power of recovery. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at Miss Klegg's back. His face was white. It's a difficult question." He appeared to be paralyzed by abstruse acoustic calculations. Then, very awkwardly, he took a stool and placed it at the end of Ann Veronica's table and sat down. He glanced at Miss Klegg again and spoke quickly and furtively, with eager eyes on Ann Veronica's face. "I had a faint idea once that things were as you say they are, but the affair of the ring, of the unexpected ring, puzzled me. Wish she," he indicated Miss Klegg's back with a nod, "was at the bottom of the sea. I would like to talk to you about this soon. If you don't think it would be a social outrage, perhaps I might walk with you to your railway station." "I will wait," said Ann Veronica, still not looking at him, "and we will go into Regent's Park. No, you shall come with me to Waterloo." "Right," he said, and hesitated, and then got up and went into the preparation room. Part 3. For a time they walked in silence through the back streets that led southward from the college. Capes bore a face of infinite perplexity. "The thing I feel most disposed to say, Miss Stanley," he began at last, "is that this is very sudden. It's been coming on since first I came into the laboratory." "What do you want?" he asked bluntly. "You," said Ann Veronica. The sense of publicity, of people coming and going about them, kept them both unemotional, and neither had any of that theatricality which demands gestures and facial expression. "I suppose you know I like you tremendously," he pursued. "You told me that in the Zoological Gardens." She found her muscles a tremble, but there was nothing in her bearing that a passer-by would have noted to tell of the excitement that possessed her. He seemed to have a difficulty with the word. "I love you. I've told you that practically already, but I can give it its name now. You needn't be in any doubt about it. I tell you that because it puts us on a footing." They went on for a time without another word. "But don't you know about me?" he said at last. "Something. Not much." "I'm a married man, and my wife won't live with me for reasons that I think most women would consider sound, or I should have made love to you long ago." There came a silence again. "I don't care," said Ann Veronica. "But if you knew anything of that—" "I did. It doesn't matter." "Why did you tell me? I thought we were going to be friends." He was suddenly resentful. He seemed to charge her with the ruin of their situation. "Why on earth did you tell me?" he cried. "I couldn't help it. It was an impulse. I had to." "But it changes things. I thought you understood." "I had to," she repeated. "I was sick of the make-believe. I don't care. I'm glad I did. I'm glad I did." "Look here," said Capes. "What on earth do you want? What do you think we can do? Don't you know what men are, and what life is? To come to me and talk to me like this." "I know. Something, anyhow. But I don't care. I haven't a spark of shame. I don't see any good in life if it hasn't got you in it. I wanted you to know. And now you know. And the fences are down for good. You can't look me in the eyes and say you don't care for me." "I've told you," he said. "Very well," said Ann Veronica, with an air of concluding the discussion. They walked side by side for a time. "In that laboratory one gets to disregard these passions," began Capes. "Men are curious animals, with a trick of falling in love readily with girls about your age. One has to train one's self not to. I've accustomed myself to think of you as if you were like every other girl who works at the schools, as something quite outside these possibilities. If only out of loyalty to co-education one has to do that. Apart from everything else, this meeting of ours is a breach of a good rule." "Rules are for every day," said Ann Veronica. "This is not every day. This is something above all rules." "For you?" "Not for you." "No. No. I'm going to stick to the rules. It's odd, but nothing but cliché seems to meet this case. You've placed me in a very exceptional position, Miss Stanley." The note of his own voice exasperated him. "Oh, damn!" he said. She made no answer, and for a time he debated some problems with himself. "No," he said aloud at last. "The plain common sense of the case," he said, "is that we can't possibly be lovers in the ordinary sense. That, I think, is manifest. You know, I've done no work at all this afternoon. I've been smoking cigarettes in the preparation room and thinking this out. We can't be lovers in the ordinary sense, but we can be great and intimate friends." "We are," said Ann Veronica. "You've interested me enormously." He paused with a sense of ineptitude. "I want to be your friend," he said. "I said that at the Zoo, and I mean it. Let us be friends, as near and close as friends can be." Ann Veronica gave him a pallid profile. "What is the good of pretending?" she said. "We don't pretend." "We do. Love is one thing and friendship quite another. Because I'm younger than you, I've got imagination. I know what I'm talking about. Mr. Capes, do you think I don't know the meaning of love?" Part 4. Capes made no answer for a time. "My mind is full of confused stuff," he said at length. "I've been thinking all the afternoon. Oh, and weeks and months of thought and feeling there are bottled up too. I feel a mixture of beast and uncle. I feel like a fraudulent trustee. Every rule is against me. Why did I let you begin this? I might have told." "I don't see that you could help." "I might have helped." "You couldn't." "I ought to have all the same." "I wonder," he said, and went off at a tangent. "You know about my scandalous past?" "Very little. It doesn't seem to matter. Does it?" "I think it does, profoundly." "How?" "It prevents our marrying. It forbids all sorts of things." "It can't prevent our loving." "I'm afraid it can't. But, by Jove, it's going to make our loving a fiercely abstract thing." "You are separated from your wife?" "Yes, but do you know how?" "Not exactly." "Why on earth? A man ought to be labelled. You see, I'm separated from my wife, but she doesn't and won't divorce me. You don't understand the fix I am in, and you don't know what led to our separation. And, in fact, all round the problem you don't know, and I don't see how I could possibly have told you before. I wanted to that day in the Zoo, but I trusted to that ring of yours." "Poor old ring," said Ann Veronica. "I ought never have gone to the Zoo, I suppose. I asked you to go, but a man is a mixed creature. I wanted the time with you. I wanted it badly." "Tell me about yourself," said Ann Veronica. "To begin with, I was in the divorce court. I was a co-respondent. You understand that term?" Ann Veronica smiled faintly. A modern girl does understand these terms. She reads novels, and history, and all sorts of things. Did you really doubt if I knew? "No, but I don't suppose you can understand." "I don't see why I shouldn't." To know things by name is one thing, to know them by seeing them and feeling them and being them quite another. That is where life takes advantage of youth. You don't understand. "Perhaps I don't." "You don't. That's the difficulty. If I told you the facts, I expect, since you are in love with me, you'd explain the whole business as being very fine and honorable for me, the higher morality or something of that sort. It wasn't." "I don't deal very much," said Ann Veronica, "in the higher morality, or the higher truth, or any of those things." "Perhaps you don't. But a human being who is young and clean as you are is apt to ennoble, or explain away." "I've had a biological training. I'm a hard young woman." "Nice clean hardness, anyhow. I think you are hard. There's something adult about you. I'm talking to you now as though you had all the wisdom and charity in the world. I'm going to tell you things plainly. Plainly. It's best. And then you can go home and think things over before we talk again. I want you to be clear what you're really and truly up to, anyhow." "I don't mind knowing," said Ann Veronica. "It's precious unromantic." "Well, tell me." "I married pretty young," said Capes. I have to tell you this to make myself clear, a streak of ardent animal in my composition. I married a woman whom I still think one of the most beautiful persons in the world. She is a year or so older than I am, and she is, well, of a very serene and proud and dignified temperament. If you met her you would, I am certain, think her as fine as I do. She has never done a really ignoble thing that I know of. Never. I met her when we were both very young as you are. I loved her and made love to her, and I don't think she quite loved me back in the same way." He paused for a time. Ann Veronica said nothing. "These are the sort of things that aren't supposed to happen. They leave them out of novels, these incompatibilities. Young people ignore them until they find themselves up against them. My wife doesn't understand now. She despises me, I suppose. We married, and for a time we were happy. She was fine and tender. I worshipped her and subdued myself." He left off abruptly. "Do you understand what I'm talking about? It's no good if you don't." "I think so," said Ann Veronica, and colored. "In fact, yes, I do." "Do you think of these things, these matters, as belonging to our higher nature or our lower?" "I don't deal in higher things, I tell you," said Ann Veronica, "or lower for the matter of that. I don't classify." She hesitated. "Flesh and flowers are all alike to me." "That's the comfort of you. Well, after a time there came a fever in my blood. Don't think it was anything better than fever, or a bit beautiful. It wasn't. Quite soon, after we were married, it was just within a year, I formed a friendship with the wife of a friend, a woman 8 years older than myself. It wasn't anything splendid, you know. It was just a shabby, stupid, furtive business that began between us, like stealing. We dressed it in a little music. I want you to understand clearly that I was indebted to the man in many small ways. I was mean to him. It was the gratification of an immense necessity. We were two people with a craving. We felt like thieves. We were thieves. We liked each other well enough. Well, my friend found us out and would give no quarter. He divorced her. How do you like the story?" "Go on," said Ann Veronica, a little hoarsely. Tell me all of it." "My wife was astounded, wounded beyond measure. She thought me filthy. All her pride raged at me. One particularly humiliating thing came out. Humiliating for me. There was a second correspondent. I hadn't heard of him before the trial. I don't know why that should be so acutely humiliating. There's no logic in these things. It was." "Poor you," said Ann Veronica. "My wife refused absolutely to have anything more to do with me. She could hardly speak to me. She insisted relentlessly upon a separation. She had money of her own, much more than I have, and there was no need to squabble about that. She has given herself up to social work." "Well?" "That's all, practically all, and yet wait a little, you'd better have every bit of it. One doesn't go about with these passions allayed simply because they have made wreckage and a scandal. There one is, the same stuff still. One has a craving in one's blood, a craving roused, cut off from its redeeming and guiding emotional side. A man has more freedom to do evil than a woman. Irregularly, in a quite inglorious and unromantic way, you know. I am a vicious man. That's my private life, until the last few months. It isn't what I have been, but what I am. I haven't taken much account of it until now. My honor has been in my scientific work and public discussion and the things I write. Lots of us are like that. But you see I'm smirched. For the sort of love-making you think about. I've muddled all this business. I've had my time and lost my chances. I'm damaged goods, and you're as clean as fire. You come with those clear eyes of yours, as valiant as an angel." He stopped abruptly. "Well?" she said. "That's all." "It's so strange to think of you, troubled by such things. I didn't think. I don't know what I thought. Suddenly all this makes you human, makes you real." "But don't you see how I must stand to you? Don't you see how it bars us from being lovers? You can't, at first. You must think it over. It's all outside the world of your experience." "I don't think it makes a rap of difference except for one thing. I love you more. I've wanted you, always. I didn't dream, not even in my wildest dreaming, that you might have any need of me." He made a little noise in his throat as if something had cried out within him, and for a time they were both too full for speech. They were going up the slope into Waterloo Station. "You go home and think of all this," he said, "and talk about it to-morrow. Don't say anything now, not anything. As for loving you, I do. I do, with all my heart. It's no good hiding it any more. I could never have talked to you like this, forgetting everything that parts us, forgetting even your age, if I did not love you utterly, if I were a clean, free man. We'll have to talk of all these things. Thank goodness there's plenty of opportunity. And we two can talk. Anyhow, now you've begun it, there's nothing to keep us in all this from being the best friends in the world, and talking of every conceivable thing. Is there?" "Nothing," said Ann Veronica, with a radiant face. "Before this there was a sort of restraint, a make-believe. It's gone." "It's gone." "Friendship and love being separate things. And that confounded engagement. Gone." They came upon a platform and stood before her compartment. He took her hand and looked into her eyes and spoke, divided against himself, in a voice that was forced and insincere. "I shall be very glad to have you for a friend," he said. "Loving friend. I had never dreamed of such a friend as you." She smiled, sure of herself beyond any pretending, into his troubled eyes. Hadn't they settled that already? "I want you as a friend," he persisted, almost as if he disputed something. Part 5. The next morning she waited in the laboratory at the lunch hour in the reasonable certainty that he would come to her. "Well, you have thought it over?" he said, sitting down beside her. "I've been thinking of you all night," she answered. "Well?" "I don't care a rap for all these things." He said nothing for a space. "I don't see there's any getting away from the fact that you and I love each other," he said slowly. "So far you've got me and I you. You've got me. I'm like a creature just wakened up. My eyes are open to you. I keep on thinking of you. I keep on thinking of little details and aspects of your voice, your eyes, the way you walk, the way your hair goes back from the side of your forehead. I believe I have always been in love with you. Always. Before ever I knew you." She sat motionless with her hand tightening over the edge of the table, and he too said no more. She began to tremble violently. He stood up abruptly and went to the window. "We have," he said, "to be the utmost friends." She stood up and held her arms toward him. "I want you to kiss me," she said. He gripped the window-sill behind him. "If I do," he said. "No. I want to do without that. I want to do without that for a time. I want to give you time to think. I am a man of a sort of experience. You are a girl with very little. Just sit down on that stool again and let's talk of this in cold blood. People of your sort. I don't want the instincts to rush our situation. Are you sure what it is you want of me?" "I want you. I want you to be my lover. I want to give myself to you. I want to be whatever I can to you." She paused for a moment. "Is that plain?" she asked. "If I didn't love you better than myself," said Capes, "I wouldn't fence like this with you. I'm convinced you haven't thought this out," he went on. "You do not know what such a relation means. We are in love. Our heads swim with the thought of being together. But what can we do? Here am I, fixed to respectability in this laboratory. You're living at home. It means just furtive meetings." "I don't care how we meet," she said. "It will spoil your life." "It will make it. I want you. I am clear I want you. You are different from all the world for me. You can think all round me. You are the one person I can understand and feel right with. I don't idealize you. Don't imagine that. It isn't because you're good, but because I may be rotten bad. And there's something living and understanding in you, something that is born in you each time we meet, and pines when we are separated. You see, I'm selfish. I'm rather scornful. I think too much about myself. You're the only person I've really given good, straight, unselfish thought to. I'm making a mess of my life unless you come in and take it. I am. In you, if you can love me, there is salvation. Salvation! I know what I am doing better than you do. Think of that engagement." Their talk had come to eloquent silences that contradicted all he had to say. She stood up before him, smiling faintly. "I think we've exhausted this discussion," she said. "I think we have," he answered gravely, and took her in his arms, and smoothed her hair from her forehead, and very tenderly kissed her lips. Part 6. They spent the next Sunday in Richmond Park, and mingled the happy sensation of being together uninterruptedly through the long sunshine of a summer's day with the ample discussion of their position. "This is all the clean freshness of spring and youth," said Capes. "It is love with the down on. It is like the glitter of dew in the sunlight to be lovers such as we are, with no more than one warm kiss between us. I love everything to-day, and all of you, but I love this innocence upon us most of all. You can't imagine," he said, "what a beastly thing a furtive love affair can be." "This isn't furtive," said Ann Veronica. "Not a bit of it. And we won't make it so. We mustn't make it so." They loitered under the trees. They sat on mossy banks, they gossiped on friendly benches, they came back to lunch at the Star and Garter, and talked their afternoon away in the garden that looks out upon the crescent of the river. They had a universe to talk about, 2 universes. "What are you going to do?" said Capes, with his eyes on the broad distances beyond the ribbon of the river. "I will do whatever you want," said Ann Veronica. "My first love was all blundering," said Capes. He thought for a moment and went on. "Love is something that has to be taken care of. One has to be so careful. It's a beautiful plant, but a tender one. I didn't know. I've had a dread of love dropping its petals, becoming mean and ugly. How can I tell you all I feel? I love you beyond measure, and I'm afraid. I'm anxious, joyfully anxious, like a man when he has found a treasure." "You know," said Ann Veronica. "I just came to you and put myself in your hands." "That's why, in a way, I'm prudish. I've dreads. I don't want to tear at you with hot, rough hands." "As you will, dear lover. But for me it doesn't matter. Nothing is wrong that you do. Nothing. I am quite clear about this. I know exactly what I'm doing. I give myself to you." "God send you may never repent it," cried Capes. She put her hand in his to be squeezed. "You see," he said, "it is doubtful if we can ever marry. Very doubtful. I have been thinking. I will go to my wife again. I will do my utmost. But for a long time anyhow, we lovers have to be as if we were no more than friends." He paused. She answered slowly. "That is as you will," she said. "Why should it matter?" he said. And then, as she answered nothing, "Seeing that we are lovers." Part 7. It was rather less than a week after that walk that Capes came and sat down beside Ann Veronica for their customary talk in the lunch hour. He took a handful of almonds and raisins that she held out to him, for both these young people had given up the practice of going out for luncheon, and kept her hand for a moment to kiss her finger-tips. He did not speak for a moment. "Well?" she said. "I say," he said, without any movement. "Let's go." "Go?" She did not understand him at first, and then her heart began to beat very rapidly. "Stop this humbugging," he explained. "It's like the picture and the bust. I can't stand it. Let's go. Go off and live together until we can marry. Dare you?" "Do you mean now?" "At the end of the session. It's the only clean way for us. Are you prepared to do it?" Her hands clenched. "Yes," she said very faintly, and then, "Of course. Always. It is what I have wanted, what I have meant all along." She stared before her, trying to keep back a rush of tears. Capes kept obstinately stiff and spoke between his teeth. "There's endless reasons, no doubt, why we shouldn't," he said. "Endless. It's wrong in the eyes of most people. For many of them it will smirch us forever. You do understand?" "Who cares for most people?" she said, not looking at him. "I do. It means social isolation. Struggle." "If you dare, I dare," said Ann Veronica. "I was never so clear in all my life as I have been in this business." She lifted steadfast eyes to him. "Dare!" she said. The tears were welling over now, but her voice was steady. "You're not a man for me. Not one of a sex, I mean. You're just a particular being, with nothing else in the world to class with you. You are just necessary to life for me. I've never met any one like you. To have you is all important. Nothing else weighs against it. Morals only begin when that is settled. I shan't care a rap if we can never marry. I'm not a bit afraid of anything. Scandal, difficulty, struggle. I rather want them. I do want them." "You'll get them," he said. "This means a plunge." "Are you afraid?" "Only for you. Most of my income will vanish. Even unbelieving biological demonstrators must respect decorum. And besides, you see, you were a student. We shall have hardly any money." "I don't care." "Hardship and danger?" "With you." "And as for your people?" "They don't count. That is the dreadful truth. All this swamps them. They don't count, and I don't care." Capes suddenly abandoned his attitude of meditative restraint. "By Jove!" he broke out. "One tries to take a serious, sober view. I don't quite know why. But this is a great lark, Ann Veronica. This turns life into a glorious adventure." "Ah!" she cried in triumph. "I shall have to give up biology anyhow. I've always had a sneaking desire for the writing trade. That is what I must do. I can." "Of course you can." "And biology was beginning to bore me a bit. One research is very like another. Latterly I've been doing things. Creative work appeals to me wonderfully. Things seem to come rather easily. But that and that sort of thing is just a daydream. For a time I must do journalism and work hard. What isn't a daydream is this, that you and I are going to put an end to flummery, and go." "Go," said Ann Veronica, clenching her hands. "For better or worse?" "For richer or poorer." She could not go on, for she was laughing and crying at the same time. "We were bound to do this when you kissed me," she sobbed through her tears. "We have been all this time. Only your queer code of honor honor! Once you begin with love, you have to see it through." End of chapter 14.